Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and thank you to all who participated in putting together today's event. Anna Maria Cruz, the IDRiM group, everyone from Colombia involved. I have come to a number of IDRiM events, and by all metrics, this is a remarkable success. So congratulations to everybody involved. An outstanding event. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and talk with you. For my presentation, I'm going to speak primarily to the disaster research community with a bit of a call for action. The circumstances of disasters, certainly during my lifetime, have changed remarkably. And the need for the research community to do comprehensive and rigorous research has never been greater. The importance of how we contribute to the process has never been greater. There is much that we can contribute as a foundation for better outcomes than we've been experiencing. So I'm going to use my time today, again, to talk primarily to the research community, but to the very many of you who've come today that use research. I hope there'll be a strong message for you about how we are trying to use our efforts and our time to be useful and make it available to practitioners and relevant and appropriate. I have found, personally, that I'm using words like transformative much more frequently these days. There was a time where researchers talked about small nudges and little changes and slight improvements. But I think there's a time now where we in the research community, those implementing, need to be thinking in much bolder terms, much more aggressive terms. The experience of recent years is simply not acceptable, and the trends we see coming are very disturbing and very dangerous. But science does have solutions. We can have a very much improved outcome. And the research community needs to be more bold and aggressive at describing what those opportunities are, what we know about doing better and proceeding more. In the 1980s, so almost 40 years ago, I was invited to be part of the Canadian delegation for the United Nations International Decade for Disaster Risk Reduction. And the UN declared the 1990s as the International Decade for Disaster Risk Reduction. Some of the work that was being done at that time was brought into the Yokohama Strategy and Plan for Action, later into the Hyogo Framework, and more recently the Sendai Framework for Action. That's 35, 40 years ago. The global concern about disaster losses at that time was that we were calling for global efforts to aggressively deal with the losses we were experiencing in the 1980s, in the 1990s. As an economist tracking the numbers, we did not succeed. We did not reduce the large losses of the 80s. The losses have increased and increased again. Recently, the losses are tenfold higher than they were in the 1980s, than they were 40 years ago, than they were 35 years ago. We are losing ground in a very disturbing way. While the overall losses have been rising, the knowledge about how to successfully prevent those losses has become greater and greater and greater. I'm very proud of what the research community has done all around the world to identify very specific, proven actions so that a lot of the disaster damage we are experiencing around the world is preventable. We do know what to do. And the global strategy, like the Sendai framework, is a very appropriate approach to taking that science and allowing for much better outcomes than we're experiencing today. The trend of losses becoming worse and worse can be broken. We know what to do, and we have a global strategy. We have not yet properly implemented the strategy, but we do know what to do, and we know the broad framework of what needs to be done. But it needs to be done with aggression, with urgency, with bravado, with comprehensiveness. That's where transformational change will come from. Those in the research community, I'm encouraging to be more outspoken about the extent of knowledge that we have. Solutions are known, solutions are available, the losses can be prevented. We are not waiting to learn more, we are waiting to implement what we know. We are always learning more, we will have more to say, but the goal is to act more. I have been following every January the Global Risk Report. This is a report released by the World Economic Forum. It does a survey of 2,000 or 3,000 leaders from around the world and asks world leaders what are the most important issues, most important risks in the world. Each time, the report comes in two parts. It talks about what are the most important risks for the next 10 years, and issues like disaster management are at the very top of the global agenda of the most important risks that need to be dealt with over the next 10 years. The report also talks about the most important risks of the present year or two. And the most important risk, immediate risks, are usually not disaster risk reduction and not climate change and some of the issues that require long-term commitment. This year, I believe the most important risk was inflation and the costs of living. A couple of years ago, it was COVID. A couple of years before, there was a global financial crisis. It's my view that internationally, elected leaders are constantly being challenged by a new immediate risk. Really important issues that do need to be addressed. But that is being used to delay action on issues like disaster management. Groups like the World Economic Forum, world leaders, when they come together, do indeed acknowledge this issue is incredibly important. Action is very much needed. But unfortunately, that action is always to come soon. And the greater commitment that is required to have transformative change, to have bold change, always seems to be delayed. Something new has come. For 30, for 40 years, we have been actively working on disaster management, actively working on what the solutions are to climate change. But the urgent action is constantly delayed. Within all of that, again, speaking to the disaster community, I constantly encourage that the language being used needs to be very clear by our community. Yes, we have solutions. Yes, we can have reduction in losses, despite 30 or 40 years of much higher losses. Yes, the goal can be risk reduction. Yes, we know the solutions. And we can be part, we can support the action. I was very proud to be in Sendai, to go from Sendai to Kyoto, where we launched the Global Alliance for Disaster Research Institutes, to talk about the role of science in supporting progress on disaster management. Using rigorous science, as you've been hearing throughout this conference, that provides the foundation not only for improvement, for lasting, sustainable improvement. When we do reverse the long-term trend of rising losses, we can do it with confidence that we've made the right investments. We have done the right actions so that it will be sustained and continued and not temporary. If it's based on science, I was very proud in Sendai that the reference to science solutions was frequent and throughout the report, and an element behind all of the core actions in the global strategy. The science community is here trying to support and be helpful for these actions. We as a community have not always found communicating easy for us. Sometimes our language gets technical and convoluted, and we are always learning as a community how to become more effective in sharing the solutions that we are very proud of knowing, and to know that we can be part of helping those who are active in the implementation, active in the decisions about financing, all of those critical parts to an overall national and global strategy. Science can support all of that, and we are trying to learn how to make our language better. Part of moving to transformative change that I think will be increasingly part of the disaster research, and in my opinion, as someone who's been involved in climate change research, is now increasingly coming into the conversation about adapting to climate change, has been a renewed focus on root causes. To truly solve a problem, you must get right to the depth of where the problem is coming from. The root causes sometimes, often, are difficult to identify and are complicated and challenging to solve. But more active efforts to get to the root causes are critical for using science to achieve sustained improvement in risk reduction, risk management. Some of the elements that we in Canada are involved in, this is trying to take the knowledge we have about putting up a home or a structure for a business or municipal and public infrastructure, to put the knowledge that we are learning about resilience into building codes, into the standards and rules and regulations, can allow for long-term sustained improvement so that we are not creating risk with our next generation of structures. The process of changing building codes and standards is a very slow process, but the benefits of doing it right are extremely powerful. And this is one element of where science can contribute to lasting and long-term change. Also, part of the dialogue involves land use planning. If people do not move to areas of higher risk, but that land is used for other purposes rather than where to live or where to work, but can be used for things like recreation, land use planning can keep us from moving to areas that are known of high risk and can be a very powerful tool so that we do not add and build to the risk that is in place. There are increasing areas where understanding where the risk is, the root causes of the risk. Why is it? Earlier we had a presentation on how politicians make decisions and how knowledge affects political decisions. This is important, groundbreaking research that can allow science to be even more relevant going forward. If we understand behavior, we understand decision-making, and can bring science to how to support that going forward is really, really powerful. Building on the last presentation, in Canada, we're very proud that we are working on Build Back Better as one of the priorities in the Sendai framework. But some of our initial conversations, that concept was difficult in implementation until we found the conversations about pre-disaster recovery planning. And this is the globally accepted appropriate way to help turn the concepts that were referred to in Sendai into effective action. It was not for all immediately evident when the Sendai framework was released, but using science and using experience and sharing positive events has allowed much greater understanding of how planning can be part of a process that leads to building back better. Being prepared and anticipating and recovery can happen sooner and faster and better. But it requires processes that are not yet commonplace in most of the world and are still being clarified and brought forward. I'm going to close my time today. I was looking for an opportunity today to share, particularly with the disaster research community who are here today and part of the founding of IDRiM. Our collective work is incredibly important for the Foundation for Disaster Management. We have been supporting progress for many decades now, and the knowledge that we have accumulated as a community is something that we have much to be proud of. To effectively communicate what we've found, we need to constantly challenge ourselves to become better, to become more relevant, to get involved in events like today where we're working with the community that are more involved in implementation, to make sure that our science knowledge is available and understood, to make sure that we are using the language so that we're properly communicating what we're doing is still an emerging art. To be bold and to be talking about transformative change is challenging in a world where 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we talked about nudging toward a better trajectory. Now we have moved very far from where we were trying to go, and we need to do much more than small incremental changes. As a research community, we need to talk about bolder changes. We need to talk about transforming a system that is not properly protecting society using the science that is known. And the science community needs to be more aggressive, I suggest, in terms of sharing our knowledge and speaking with pride and with confidence that applying the science that is known can have a much more powerful impact. I have learned to become comfortable with words that I wasn't using 30 years ago, like bold and aggressive and transformative, but in my opinion, that is the need today for the science that is available to truly have a powerful impact, for us to be able to demonstrate and prove to the rest of society that our work is really important. I do believe that the multi-decade disturbing trend of rising disaster losses can be halted and reversed based on science. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for sharing, and thank you to the community of the leadership you've been offering for a long period of time in terms of disaster research. Thank you.